Minecraft Hardcore. It doesn't need an explanation. You've seen enough videos to know that when you die, your world gets deleted. Though I've had enough unfinished series for you to never experience that from me. But unlike those unfinished series, I'm going to be pursuing this one to the bitter end. Meaning at some point, you will see my death firsthand. But that's not today. Today you see for yourself the world spawn, and then me going about the same first tasks I do in every Minecraft world. Punching a tree, crafting your finest of tables, making a horrendous wooden pickaxe, and then hand digging through the dirt because there ain't no way I'm crafting more than one wooden tool in order to reach the stone underneath. It was then goodbye to the age of wood I've had to put up with for 30 seconds too long, and hello to the stone age, which isn't much better, but I wasn't saying no. Just like I wasn't saying no to the small amount of iron I'd uncovered when collecting stone. Advance into the iron age? No, it was a small amount and we had wood to gather, most of which I'd probably convert into charcoal. Of course it wasn't all wooden games, a serious bit of hunting went on, because in hardcore Minecraft, starving to death is a thing. Sheep were especially important to me because their wool was needed for bed crafting, so of course that meant only being able to find the one. Wood gathering was put on hold for sheep finding. I didn't want to bury myself away for a night in hiding when it got dark. It didn't take long to find a second sheep, so my hopes were high, but the third sheep was a grey sheep, so wouldn't be able to mix and match its wool in the bed crafting process. And that was all she wrote for our first day in the world. It was getting dark and I was still wandering around like a lost sheep. Yes, slight pun, not very good. So with no other option to remain undetected through the night, I dug into the side of the terrain as a hiding spot, just like I hadn't wanted to. I thought about staying out and continuing exploration, but that's the usual sort of stupid stuff that gets me killed. Still, just because I was bound to a small space didn't mean I was incapacitated. I made a couple of furnaces, enabling us to throw our logs in to cook for the charcoal I spoke of earlier, some of which was used to cook the raw meat from the day's events into something edible, and so when the next day rolled around I left with my head held high, don't know why, and again began my indiscriminate slaughter of all wildlife for their tender meat, keystone species or not, and that last white sheep needed was found. Now we could focus on something more important, real estate. Let's be real, wherever I set up home would become the centre of the world, unironically being the main character and most important entity within a 30 million block radius. I was considering the valley we were in because of the nice open space with a lot of room for expansion, plus easy to traverse terrain, the complete opposite of the mountain in the background, and yet they called my name harder than they'd called Gandalf to avoid the mines of Moria. In all my time playing Minecraft, which wasn't until the 1.16 update, I'd never had a mountain base, despite having often fantasized about one. The terrain isn't easy to work with and is much less abundant in resources than the valley below, but I had visions of a settlement up here thriving beyond belief. There could have also been altitude sickness talking. Regardless, I set up shop that consisted of a crafting table, a couple of chests and a couple of furnaces. More logs went into cook for charcoal, and the raw meat I'd gathered through the day went into the other one. I was going to say what else could you possibly want, but a bed might be helpful if we were going to be serious about surviving. Don't know why they don't have these stationed all over Mount Everest. A good night's sleep is a lifesaver. Unsurprisingly, there wasn't much up in the mountains, but if life could find a way, I'd find a way, and it started with us clearing the spruce trees. Honestly, I felt like an honorary member of the outdoor boys being out here in the snow, surviving out in the elements. Though, I'm telling you again, having a bed up here in the mountains is a game changer. Real world survivalists take note. And 6 full REM cycles later, we were back to work chopping down the trees. I was thinking spruce would be a nice material to build from. We were at it all day, but once it got dark, we needed to look out for predators. And what do predators hate other than Chris Hansen? Tiny little torches. So we littered the ground around our base camp, expanding our perimeter a little and reducing theirs. Though because of the shape of the terrain, the hidden cave networks and sheer volume of space, it wasn't going to happen overnight. And having a burning zombie wake you up next day was going to be missed. Like with Asmongold's dead rat, rotting flesh really does work well as an alarm clock. I continued to place torches in the area I knew mobs would spawn in come night time if I didn't get there first, and came face to face with a creeper and spider. The spider I wasn't worried about, it was the creeper that could ruin this world if it got the chance, and I wasn't gonna let it. It's all well and good having a few possessions in one place and calling it home, but it's not really, not without a house of some sort, and it's what I was flattening the ground to do, or at the very least an outline so I knew what I was going to be working with. And this is as good an opportunity as any to explain what I wanted from this world, what I was aiming for, and that is a hardcore world based on a slower rate of progression that's not often seen on YouTube nowadays. I'm I'm guilty of this myself. It's the complete opposite of what I usually try to do, which is to find a village and get to work setting up a fully realised trade hall for speedrunning myself to the best gear in the game, because for me, that's when I thought the game really begun, when massive projects could become viable with only the void being your limit. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it's just I don't tend to enjoy the journey up until that point, and that's what I want to do, take things at a more chilled pace and actually take the time to think about what I'm building, even if what ends up being built is a pile of shit. I'm hoping it'll be a pile of shit I enjoy being, rather than a disconnected world of large projects thousands of blocks apart. Don't get me wrong, depending on whether or not I die, I'm certain at some point this world will have huge projects I'll take on, but I want to get there more slowly and appreciate the levels of progression to get to that point. Now that you know that, I could go back to house design, and the first outline was a little thin for my liking. It meant removing a little bit more terrain to accommodate for the dimensional expansion, and being in the mountains, iron's a fairly common resource we'd come across. It was nice to be coming across the stuff without having to go mining for it. After the revision, these were the dimensions I was going to be working with for not only my starter house, but my world home. However, first I needed to take out all of the exposed ores on show across our mountain. I kept seeing them everywhere I looked and they were distracting, so they needed to go. I got into the search enough that it took me off the mountain down closer to sea level. There's a small stony shore near to the ocean, usually having a few exposed ores on show, including copper, a material I've never built with, always say I'm going to build with and always leave in a chest. It was on my trip away from the mountain I noticed a rather appetising island out in the sea. On inspection it was a cool little place, in a different world at a different time. I'd like to have set up shop here. In fact, if I'd come across this before the mountain, this surely would have been our home. With other custom islands in the sea, having bridges interconnecting them, it would have been great. But for this world, the mountains were our home, and although I'd technically only been alive for a very short amount of time and was still at the humble beginning stage, returning to them felt like I belonged. Just like the iron we'd collected belonged in the furnace to be cooked. A lot of it got spent on hoppers for creating an auto composting setup and auto smelting setup, for having items composting and smelting in the background without having to be actively involved, freeing up time to do other things, and at this stage of the game a huge quality of life gain. However, it felt like they were in the middle of nowhere rather than being inside a nice warm house, and what's the point of having house dimensions if I wasn't going to build them up? The result, a certified starter house that any first day survivor would be proud of, maybe even impressed by, because it beats dirt. But don't let first impressions bias your judgment. I'm going to improve this house until it's at a state I can actually say it's finished and be proud to live there. This is the worst it's ever going to look, and from here it's going to undergo a big transformation. Don't believe me? Well, even the Mona Lisa has an undercoat. Seems weird, but I'm going to have a chest for fuel and another for items and blocks to smelt. Fuel is for backup fuel for the auto smelters and for coal I can use for torches. The chest for items and blocks to smelt are for those that are of lower quantity than 16. I'm trying to smelt items in multiples of 16 at a time, because those items will be split into 2 furnaces, so 8 items each, and coal smelts exactly 8 items, so gets me the most bang for my buck for coal usage. I set up another chest next to the auto composter for bone meal, and then a chest for chests ironically, a chest for various tree saplings of the world, a chest for torches and other light emitting blocks, and a chest for food. Basically a collection of items and blocks I felt would be fine sitting in a single chest. As for the main storage, it started with a couple of large chests, one for logs and one for planks. However, the sound of unwanted guests took me outside, initiating a standoff. At my current state without any armour, there was a very real chance I'd die from an altercation, so I left hoping they wouldn't follow, which was fine because I needed to leave the mountain for a bit anyway, if the sinking snow let me. It's gotta be one of the most annoying blocks of the game. I needed a lot of wood. The storage system was going to require many more large chests than the 2 we'd set up. It wasn't going to be anything crazy, but I did want to get my possessions organised from the get-go, something I never do. But I'd left without my bed, so I had to return to my wooden box to sleep. Unfortunately, the unwanted guests could still be heard when I awoke. My remaining iron went into crafting a shield, a chest plate and some boots, and then I took the heat to them. If I didn't now, likely they could front me at a time I'm unprepared and kill me. Afterwards, with what wood I'd collected and while at the box, the storage was built a little more, until I was interrupted by a raid captain. I'd wondered where he'd been when I'd taken out his friends. Good thing he was alone because he had the piercing enchant, making my shield ineffective. The banner was mounted as a trophy of my first hardcore trial of the world. Surprisingly, the wood collected had been enough to get the bulk of the storage sorted. I'm sure there were things I was forgetting, but the main categories were there. Anything I think of at a later date, I'd add in. Crafting that many chests this early on had wiped me out of wood again, and I needed a lot more for both making more charcoal and for house building materials. The spruce saplings I'd collected earlier were arranged in the 2x2 variation to grow the giant spruce trees, because they offered a heck of a lot of wood for the small amount of ground space required. And about halfway through, I stopped to put all of what I'd collected into the auto smelter for producing several stacks of charcoal. That might seem like wasted effort, but I'm usually always smelting something, so for me having a large supply of good fuel in reserve was a must. I also had a little break when it got dark to place torches. Even with having placed loads already, much of the mountain remained untouched by light. The rest of the logs collected prior to torch placing went into the auto smelter. By this point there was still a couple of trees left to take down, so I did that, and then replanted all of the saplings with the intention of putting in another big tree cutting session, this time for the wood I'd be using for the build. And while I waited for said saplings to grow, I got to work clearing the immediate area from around the outside of my house. Wanted a few blocks of space between the outside wall of my home and that of the surrounding mountain. Unsurprisingly, sometimes that meant uncovering ores, no objections. It was only a 4 blocks worth of space and felt rather narrow, and from further away the box was half hidden behind the terrain, in a bad way. Remember, I didn't have home insurance, and with only 4 blocks of space between a potential avalanche and my property, I wasn't likely to get it, so I was expanding that perimeter of space to an 8 block radius. Stone tools made the process slow going, but with it not being a 100 days video, I had nothing but time. Sometimes I'd stop to place a handful more torches when it got dark, but for the most part I was focused. It was surprising how often I came across ores from just removing an additional 4 blocks of terrain. Again, like before, no objections. Obviously we were also getting a lot of cobblestone. While I slowly chipped away at the terrain, I thought I might as well have a load of it cooking to turn into stone, seeing as I was bound to use some for the house. Once I'd gotten enough iron, a second auto smelting setup was installed to help with our smelting needs. 100% this would be a good investment. A load of cobblestone was dumped into the new setup. It's only a tiny bit of progress, but it made me happy to see, as well as having enough iron left over to complete my armor set, accidentally making another pair of unneeded boots. It was nice to not be so naked anymore. I might not show it, but it's cold up here in the mountains. Even with having the auto smelters, I also put in a couple of standalone furnaces in case the auto smelters are backed up with tons of items, and I needed something smelted quick. Then it was back to work removing the blocks from around the house, until it was done. The terrain doesn't look natural, but I didn't care, now having 8 blocks worth of space to be able to see the house from all angles. You can really see how consistent I've been with my block palette. With the trees now regrown and the furnaces stocked up with fuel for the near future, this tree cutting session would be for building materials, like I said. Unsurprisingly, when it got dark I placed more torches around the mountain, but also surprisingly, because there'd been a lot of torch placing sessions and there was still a lot more to do. Wood gathered, I could put my head to turning our wooden box into a piece of architecture that a real world real estate agent would want to get their hands on. The first step was to put in spruce log columns the same height as the walls. I don't think I've said yet, but anyone who's watched my other videos will know I don't think highly of myself when it comes to building. Trying to create anything extra on top of our wooden box was way outside of my comfort zone, so the plan was to break the build into little steps, making one improvement at a time rather than taking it on as a whole and getting overwhelmed. I'm a big believer in incremental improvements. It's how I keep my house tidy and well maintained in the real world, and if it works for that, it will no doubt work in Minecraft. There's no other option really, because I have no overarching design in mind. I am winging it to the utmost. Taking a step back, already I could see it had improved a lot from the simple spruce blocks we'd begun with. Old me would have been tempted to stop here. New me, on the other hand, broke out the stone cutter to turn some of our smelted stone into chiseled stone bricks. This was sort of a left field shot. Not convinced they were going to work, but I'd give them a try. And after they were installed, I was still unsure if they were the right choice over regular stone bricks. Still, they could be changed later if they didn't infuse well with the rest of the build. Core, check me out. Infuse well with the rest of the build. I was starting to sound just like a pretentious builder. Exactly what I'm aiming for. A second layer of chiseled stone bricks made it look a little better, but now it looked slightly top heavy. Spruce trapdoors went outside the windows to act as shutters, but they blended in too much with the background spruce walls to be noticeable. So a trip to the local down the mountain forest was in order to collect other wood types, their gradients being lighter than that of spruce and so will offer a better contrast. Cool, I'm doing it again with that builder lingo. Gradients, contrast, just wait until I start talking about texturing, then you'll really know a personal transformation has happened. I opted to go with oak trapdoors rather than birch for outside the windows. They're now noticeable, but not in a garish in-your-face sort of way. They blend in quite well. Next step was to install stone brick stairs to give the chiseled stone bricks a more arching appearance, or at least to make the space around the window more curved and less rigid looking. The result was achieved for the top half, but now I was feeling the chiseled stone on the bottom half looked a little chunky, something I'd fix in a bit. Again, I was leaving the mountain to head to the shore, killing animals on the way of course. We needed glass for the windows, and luckily there was a small tiny beach at the shoreline we'd be able to grab what was needed. Looking back up at the mountain from the shoreline was a really nice aesthetic, something you'd find on a postcard, and if this was the real world I'd go climb that mountain. Though seeing as it's where we live, I ended up having to climb it in game too, so I'm not sure why I said that. that. The empty window frames were filled with glass panes, and from that alone it's crazy how much more of a homely feel the place got. And I've got to say, while it's not finished by any stretch of the imagination, it is starting to look like it fits being in the mountains. Before the roof was tackled, I went in search of a place to set up a mine. I wanted it in the mountains with my house, but away from the house because I'm thinking in the future about making some builds underneath the house, and I don't want them to collide with the mines when we get to making them. This wasn't happening out of the blue to get out of house building, quite the opposite. I was doing this because of house building. I wanted to use deep slate for the roof, deep slate being found in the lower quadrant of the world, and so I figured if I'm going to go down there to get it anyway, I might as well get a staircase to the bottom of the world set up for creating a mining hub at a later date, because I will need to come mining at some point. And it wasn't just a straight staircase to the bottom of the world, there was a flat section put in at Y level 16 as it's a great level for iron. I know being up in a mountain is better for iron, but if I wanted to come underground to search for the stuff, Y equals 16 is the way to go. Having this flat section will easily allow me to branch off to go in search of the stuff. After the flat section was created, when I tried to continue the staircase downwards, redstone blocked my way. So quickly put down a crafting table, made a furnace, put the iron I had on me in to cook, though I was only going to wait for 3 of them to cook, to craft for ourselves an iron pick, allowing us to remove the redstone blocking the way of progress, continuing on our way to the bottom of the world once more. The next obstacle wasn't as easy a fix, an ancient city I'd never found in a single player world. If this had been regular survival, I would have gone down there to explore straight away, but knowing the dangers, there was no way I was heading down there in my current state in a hardcore world. So I mined through the roof in a straight line over the length of the city, until I reached the other side and could go back to heading down into the world. Of course, if it was only for deep slate, any level below Y equals 0 would have been fine, but I wanted a second mining hub set up for diamond mining at the bottom of the world. So I was doing that while I was here, still picking up deep slate through the process. Talking of diamonds, our staircase passed through a small noodle cave, where we found a small cluster of the rare mineral, go me, and gold, go me again. The cave led around to the outskirts of the ancient city we'd been tunneling up over before. I put a few torches down, but I wasn't wanting to go exploring. If there'd been a chest close by, I might have gone for it, but these places had shriekers everywhere, evidenced by me taking about 10 steps too far and setting one off. Luckily, it was only the deep dark effect that appeared and not a warden. On the bright side, if you could see one in this darkness, you have 4 chances before the warden is spawned, so I was never in danger at this point, and I wasn't going to be reducing our number of chances any more than that for the time being, going back to mining down to the bottom of the world, which wasn't that much further down than the ancient city, and then having gotten to the bottom of the world, decided to leave. That trip alone had got me a fairly decent amount of deep slate I wanted to put to use. The stone cutter was used to turn the blocks into stairs, and then I got to work making them my roof, but I didn't have as many as I thought and ran out. However, I will say what we had been able to place fit nicely with the colour scheme. Deep slate was definitely the right choice. So it was back to the mines, and rather than use the staircase all the way down to deep slate level to gather the stuff, I thought, as I'm heading down, I might as well increase the height of the staircase, because I wanted to put in stair blocks at some point, and I'm not going to be able to use them if we only had a 2 blocks of height to work with. We all know headroom is a necessity in this economy. Once I'd done that all the way to the bottom, I turned around and reclimbed the stairway, only to then work from the top down to the bottom, widening the staircase slightly. I didn't want a 1 block wide stairway, I wanted something better and more fitting for this world. It was a peaceful task until I was interrupted by silverfish and got flashbacks to my time beating the world only walking backwards. They're such a troublesome mob to go up against in number because their hitboxes are so small, and my accuracy for finding those hitboxes is awful. I think I only hit them maybe 1 in every 4 swings of my sword. However, I wish I could say silverfish was the worst of the problems I faced, because as I was widening our stairway to the bottom of the world, I fell through the floor down into the ancient city, setting off another shrieker and breaking my spine in the process. I stood there silently thinking about what I wanted to do and whether or not the emergency services would be able to reach me. I concluded they couldn't. However, it then occurred to me the hole I fell through was directly above, and knowing I could set off another shrieker again without the fear of a warden spawning gave me the confidence needed to tower back up to safety. After that scare, I thought it best to widen the flat sections of the stairway that were directly over the ancient city while I was still on high alert, widening it to the overall width I'd been planning for the stairway in general. My thought was to get this out of the way now, then I could go back to widening the actual staircase without fear of dropping through the floor again. And that's exactly what I did after the flat sections were finished. Go back to widening the staircase. If any of you are wondering, I planned to make the staircase 7 blocks wide. Originally, when I came back to the mining staircase this second time, I'd been thinking I was going to widen it all the way down to the bottom of the world in this one sitting, but after my 30th or so pickaxe broke, I thought it was time to call it a day on the mines. During the process of carving out what I had so far, I'd surely gotten enough of the block I'd initially gone down there for, deep slate. So it was back to placing stair blocks at the house, interrupted not long into it by a visiting wandering trader who'd heard of my high altitude home. I wanted his cherry blossom saplings, but didn't have the emeralds to buy them. Being up in the mountains, I had found emeralds during excavation of the terrain around my house, but hadn't wanted to mine this stuff because I wanted the raw ore blocks themselves. Once we get to villager trading, emeralds will become easily accessible. The raw ore blocks, on the other hand, wouldn't, so I'm waiting until I get silk touch to pick them up. After doing the bulk of the roof, I'd hoped it would look good, but I'd shaped it like a bell, and I wasn't a fan of it. That'd teach me for trying to be all fancy and come up with a different style of roof. Maybe that's why I killed the wandering trader and his llamas. I felt like it's a tough gig being a wandering trader. You travel the land far and wide trying to sell your goods, only to get killed out of anger or for your leads. If there'd been a way to put him to work, I would have had him take out this top half of the roof because I didn't want to. But seeing as I've said the point of this world is slow progression, I wanted to be happy with what we build. The fixed roof was much more conservative in design, but more fitting for the house. The last thing I did was to place bottom slabs on top to stop mob spawns without having to place torches and make the house look like a birthday cake. On the inside of the house, seeing as I had windows that suggested a second floor, I put in top slabs around the room. In hindsight, I think I should have gone with regular planks. I was trying to conserve on resources and didn't put in a full floor, but rather a walkway around the top half of the room. I put in some ladders to get from the ground floor up to the walkway because I didn't know what staircase design I wanted to use or where I'd put the thing. There was also space to put a third floor in the roof of the house, giving us another area to put whatever else we wanted. I then filled in the sides of the roof, which were basically the walls of the new attic room. While I was working inside the house, I thought it was as good a time as any to fix up the ground floor flooring, most of it being the original blocks of the environment that were here when I'd arrived. They were replaced with oak planks to stick to the general block theme I had going on, and like what I'd done with the oak trap doors, the oak planks offered an acceptable level of contrast against the spruce walls. The place wasn't finished, but it looked a lot better than it had, now not being quite as derelict on the inside. On the outside, I was going to experiment with spruce fences, but a bloody goat wanted to start some chivon. He got what he deserved. I hadn't liked the spruce fences, so again changed them for the oak variant. I also tried out gates as an alternative, getting on with them better above the house windows. During the process, another venturing raid captain saw his opportunity and took his chances trying to knock me off my dirt pillar. You'll be surprised to hear I was grateful for the visit because we got another banner out of the interaction. I do like myself a banner. After that, I went back to housework, removing a layer of deep slate bricks under the bottom slabs at the top of the roof on both sides of the house. With the build coming together nicely, I no longer liked the stone brick stairs at the bottom of the house, replacing them with spruce fences. They were also put in under the first story windows too. In my humble opinion, they looked a lot better. Our recently acquired ominous banner went up on the outside of our house, displaying our willingness to self-defend. And after looking at the house for a bit more, I decided some, not all, of the chiseled stone bricks needed to be removed. They just felt heavy looking, if that makes any sense at all. I know they're the same size as any other block, but there was something about some of them that felt too weighty for the build they were a part of. They were replaced with stone brick stairs and slabs to give a more rounded and arched appearance above the ground floor windows. As for the entrance, it looked a little bare. A simple deep slate archway over the top of the entranceway would fix that issue. Up until this point, I'd been telling myself I'd use buttons in the build. I felt like if I could make them work, I'd be up in my building game. All the pros use buttons, right? But where I'd placed them looked a little too noisy in my opinion, as if the build was trying too hard. But I still wanted to use them, so their positions were switched to the centre of the chiseled stone bricks, and I felt that worked better. Back upstairs in the attic, I took out some of the planks from the side walls and filled them in with stone bricks to break up the monotony of spruce. Outside on the roof, I was tempted to fit windows for the attic. Like I've said many a time, I'm not a builder, this was way outside my comfort zone, and my head was hurting with how much thought I was having to put in. I didn't have a clue about the best way to go about it, but strangely enough was enjoying the process. A surprise in a lot of ways when, like I'd said earlier in the video, most of my time in Minecraft prior had been focused on either game progression or huge projects. Slowing the paces felt really nice. Stairs were put into the inside of the attic so I'd be able to see out of the windows we just spent 20 minutes installing, and more windows put into the sides of the attic walls too, which meant putting up trapdoors on either side of them on the outside of the house. Using a campfire, I installed and brought a chimney to life on top of the house. That was the exterior of the house pretty much complete. It looked a lot nicer than the original plank box we'd started with, that I'm sure many of you were thinking was going to stay around for a lot longer time than it did. As for the interior, there was still work to be done. For some reason I'd felt a line of stone bricks bricks on the first floor walkway was a good idea, and then stone brick columns inside the walls, which actually was a better idea. Upstairs in the attic, I removed some slabs in place of spruce logs to give the appearance of old beams in the ceiling when looking up from down on the ground or first floor. And as I'd done on the ground floor, I did to the first floor, putting in stone brick columns into the walls. Interior finished. Looking back now, there's still work to be done, but at the time I was happy. Then it was time for some fresh air, using torches to light a little more of the mountain around the house. Preventing these guys was still big on the agenda. These other guys not so much, as now we had armor I could tank a few hits before having to take them out. Back at the house I finally put in a front door, and then left to go chop down spruce trees. I was going to be crafting a lot of chests, and a lot of chests meant more wood than I had at the time. I needed so many because I'd noticed my storage already filling up to full capacity for certain categories, namely stone and cobblestone, and so rather than adding more chests on the ground floor, I thought the attic was the perfect place for overflow and bulk storage of blocks we were going to acquire a lot of from our various projects within the world. Downstairs would be for quick access, while upstairs would be for larger quantities. I didn't bother to label them. I'd do that as and when I moved blocks up into the space because I didn't know exactly what blocks would end up needing overflow chests. The exception being cobblestone, because I definitely did need to move a lot of it into the new overflow area because of how much we'd acquired. I'd like to say that was the last thing to do, but after spending a decent amount of time in the area, I'd grown to dislike the terrain directly in front of the house. It was blocking a good view of our build, and so it was either move the house or take on more excavation work. As you can see on your screen, I opted for the latter. Relative to the bad stone tools we had access to, it was a large project, but as said earlier in the video, I had nothing but time, and this mini project meant we were again adding more cobblestone to the attic. With the area around the house being sufficiently lit from all the torch placement, I hadn't felt the need to sleep, so for the first time since the world's creation, we had a run-in with phantoms. I killed them both and didn't get a single phantom membrane from either. After the excavation was finished, I made some shears to gather a bunch of leaves from a nearby tree to use for decorative bushes around the house. I thought it was a nice touch, and then placed trapdoors around the outside of the bushes to act as containers. And that is the house officially complete, with a nice spacious front area that will be worked on at a later date. But for now, I'd like to say I can officially call this place home. I like how it's turned out. Beats every other starter house I've ever done, and that was our first episode of this hardcore world of a slower rate of progression. Alright, bye.